Hey guys, welcome back to my podcast. Today we are continuing our discussion of horror topics. If you guys have been following me, you know that I've dedicated the whole month of October to pretty much everything horror. And we've had some pretty good topics so far. Last week, if you missed it, I was talking about Stephen King's It and all the adaptations of that and why it has become my favorite horror movie. Surprise, surprise, even though I don't really like clowns like that. But it's such a good story, and I'll talk about it a little bit more today as well. Um, but today we are talking about books. I know that sounds boring. You're like, we're talking about books. Yes, we're talking about scary stories. Let's talk about some scary stories because I always feel like, you know, there's tons of discussions we can have about films, about TV shows, even about music videos, which I've kind of covered all that. But a lot of this material comes from novels or books. So I feel like why not give a spotlight to books because I am a lover of books. I love reading. If you know me, you know that I love reading. I've loved reading for a really long time. Sometimes I go through phases where I don't read as much, but I made it a goal for this month to kind of get back into physical books because I've always sort of had this adoration for physical copies of things, especially novels and even magazines. Now, I know that's not that great for the planet using all that paper, but I just love books. I love being able to go to a bookstore and pick up a book and read through it and flip the page and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it's just nostalgia because that's the way I grew up, but I love it so much. Now, of course, I do still like read from my laptop a lot, and I'll read from my phone, and I even have a Nook, which is like a digital reader. It's like really old. I've had it since high school. It's basically like kind of like the Kindle, but just not as high tech. But you're able to purchase books on there through Barnes and Noble, and then you can read and all this stuff. It's like a touch screen kind of thing, but it's like really small and really old. And I don't have that with me unfortunately because I have a ton of books on there. But I actually have some physical books with me that I'm going to be showing you, and of course, I still have the It ones. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And I did a little section of reading. I kind of was like reading to you guys last week. I don't know. It seems like some people kind of like that, so maybe I could do a little bit more of that today. I'm not sure what portion of the book I could read because it's a lot in that whole entire novel. But yeah, let's get into it. We're going to be talking about books. Oh, and before I do get into that, I did want to make just a little quick announcement that there is a possibility that I may be changing the date of when I go live. So when I do my podcast. So since I've started in April, I've been going live on Facebook every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Now that might change because my personal schedule might be changing soon. There is no confirmation of that right now, but I'm just kind of giving you guys a heads up that I might not be doing my podcast on Tuesdays anymore. And if so, of course, I will announce it on here and let you guys know. I'll definitely put it on my social media accounts. And what I could probably do if that happens is make like a poster or a flyer so that way everybody can see it and there's no confusion. But yeah, just kind of giving you guys a heads up just in case that does happen. And I'm thinking maybe if I could change the date, I might start doing the podcast on the weekends. So maybe that will be a little bit easier for people to tune in because I know for the most part, people right now are working in school. And so nobody can really like tune in at 1 p.m. because everybody's usually busy at that time. But maybe if I do it on a Friday or a Saturday or something like that, then you guys will be able to kind of participate a little bit more. And I'm thinking if there's somebody that's watching that's like, man, I would like to be a guest on her show, but like I can't do it. My schedule won't allow me. Well, if I change the date, maybe you can get on. Just hit me up and let me know. I'm still open to having guests. Anybody's welcome to come on as long as you're willing to talk about the topics that I've chosen. And yeah, anybody can come on. So the invitation is still open for you guys, just so you know. But yeah, let's get into books. Let's get into books. So the first author I wanted to kind of put a spotlight on is Lois Duncan. Now, I absolutely love her books. I was reading her books way back in middle school, which is funny looking back on that now because it's like, why was I so interested in horror novels in middle school when I was a really scary kid? But I think maybe what I've learned is I think I was able to digest horror a little bit better through books than watching films. Just because, again, because I've always loved reading and it was just a little bit different reading about it than watching it in a film. But to be honest, sometimes reading scary stories can actually be a little bit creepier than watching movies because, usually books are so much more detailed. So, but in her case, I think what she's done well with her stories is they're not very graphic. It's not like you'll have 5 pages of a sex scene or you'll have like, something really like gory. Her books typically aren't like that. They're more of thrillers, so it's much more suspenseful than anything. And so if that's kind of your jam, I highly recommend checking out any of her books. Now, her books are definitely catered towards a young adult audience and maybe even kind of kids and stuff. That's what she was really writing her books for. So that's probably why I was reading them at such a young age. But like honestly, I would read them now. And there's some of her books that I never got a chance to read, that I really want to go back and kind of, read. And then also the ones that I did read, I'm like, hey, let me go back and reread those because they were like really good stories from what I remember. Um, but yeah, so if you're like, who is Lois Duncan? Like, what does she write? So her most popular novel that I know of was I Know What You Did Last Summer. I think everybody kind of knows that story or has heard of it. It turned into a '90s slasher film starring Jennifer Love Hewitt. So that ended up being a big thing for her, of course. But the novel itself was originally published in 1973. So the book has been around for quite a while. And I think a lot of her stories come from, I would say, maybe like the '70s and the '80s. And then I'm not sure if she was writing as much, in previous years. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2016. So I'm not sure if, the last few years of her life, if she was really writing thrillers and horror stories like that, or if she kind of moved on to a different genre. I know another big thing that she wrote about that I never read is one of her children unfortunately was murdered, and she wrote like a whole book about it. I'm not sure if they ever found out who it was that did it to her, but I think that was a biggie for her as well. But like I said, I know What You Did Last Summer was probably like, the most popular thing that she's ever written. And funny enough, I never actually read the book. I don't know why. I think I purposely bypassed it because I was like, well, that's a movie. I want to read something that I've never heard of. And so I guess I just picked up one of her books one day and I liked it. And so I went back and was like, hey, let me find another one of hers. And it just kept happening. Like I was reading her books back to back to back. And like I said, this was in middle school. So I was only reading what was available to me in the school library. So after that, I kind of, moved away from thriller and horror stories, and I kind of got a little bit more into romance and stuff as I got older. But but yeah, that was such a good time. Like if I think of one author that really shaped my childhood or shaped my preteen years, it's definitely her. I read a lot of her books. Some notable mentions that I wrote down was Killing Mr. Griffin, Summer of Fear, Stranger with My Face, and Down a Dark Hall. Now, I think Stranger with My Face was made into a Lifetime movie. Don't quote me, I could be wrong, but I feel like I remember seeing that on TV and I'm like, wait, isn't that the Lois Duncan book? But I didn't really watch it, so I don't know. I'm sure some of her other books were adapted into maybe like, films or TV shows, and I probably don't know about it. But yeah, her books were like so, so good. And I really want to go back and read them. And it's such a shame that I never actually bought a copy of her books because, like I said, I was always reading them in the library. So, it was free for me to do that back then. But now I'm like, yeah, I definitely need to like have a collection of her books. And I'm not sure. I mean, they probably are anywhere like Barnes and Nobles or any of your local bookstores that you have. They probably will be there. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure if her books are kind of considered, like collector's items now that she's not here anymore. I'm not too sure how easy her books would be to find, but like I'm just like, yeah, I need to get a hold of her books. I need to have at least a few of her books in my collection, just because I love her so much, and it doesn't make sense for me to not have it. So, um, yeah, definitely wanted to mention her. I don't know if you guys are familiar with her work or if you know of a book by her that is really good and I didn't mention it. Please leave it in the comments or message me or something and let me know to read it. Another good place to find books just in general and to find out, like what the book is about, what people are saying. There's a website called Goodreads, um, that I've been using for years. And it's like kind of like, it is kind of like a bookstore or website, but it's really like ran by fans and people put reviews and they rate books and everything. And you're able to save on your profile. If you have an account, you're able to save like all of the books that you've read, and then you're able to mark books that you want to read, or even like favorite books and stuff like that. So that way you can kind of keep track, and it's very organized of like all the different books that you read. So if you're a heavy reader and you're just like, I've read so many books, I don't even remember like what I read, that's a good website to track your books. And then another thing is, like I said, they have reviews. So if there's a book that you're looking into buying or something, you're like, well, let me see what people are saying. Of course, you can always look on Google, but Goodreads for sure is like, you'll get a little bit more detail of people leaving comments and saying like, I like this book or I didn't, or, wasn't really worth the buy, that kind of thing. So I recommend that for sure. Like I said, I've been using it for quite a while. So I have books marked on there of hers that I've read, and then some ones that I wanted to read. So I would like to go back and read I Know What You Did Last Summer, just because I've heard that the novel is I think it's pretty different than the film. I was obviously because it was made in a different time. And I think the film was probably much more gory than the way she wrote it. Because again, she was writing for kids and teens and everything. So I would like to go back and read that one day. And then the other thing too was I was kind of reading up on her. I found out there was a little bit of controversy around the type of content and just the genre of books that she was writing for such a young audience. And I think that's funny I guess thinking about it now, because there's so much there's so much gory media that we consume now, that thinking about that, I'm like, her stuff is nothing compared to like what we see on the news, what we see on YouTube and Twitter and every other social account. But back then, I think there was kind of a little bit of controversy because she was writing thrillers and suspenseful, like scary stuff, and it was made for, like I said, YA. And so I guess some people, maybe some parents didn't like that as much. I don't know, but killer writing skills. Love her stories. She did suspense and thriller so well. Um, and yeah, I definitely recommend checking out her books. So I had to get a shout out to my girl because she's one of my favorite authors. And I would love to kind of get back into her work, really, because I haven't read it since like probably since middle school or maybe entering high school. And then the other one I wanted to mention, which is somebody, I think, a name that everybody should recognize, R.L. Stein, who wrote the Goosebumps series. So that pretty much was like, that took over the whole, I would say, all of the 90s, especially probably like early mid 90s. Goosebumps series. I don't even know how many of those books that man wrote, but there's a ton of them. And I think there's even what do you call it? Like he wrote a story about one character and then it goes on to be like several other books about the same character, that kind of thing. And he's obviously had great success from Goosebumps series. There are two, maybe even three movies now. There's Goosebumps movies that were in theaters. I remember there was a Goosebumps TV series that came out in the 90s. I remember watching. That was actually pretty creepy. It might be available for streaming on Netflix still, if I'm not mistaken, unless it's on Hulu. But I know I saw it on one of the streaming platforms, and I'm like, oh, they're showing Goosebumps on here. So look that up if you've never seen it. And then let's see. He had some movies too that I remember seeing on Disney Channel or ABC or something like that. There was one called The Haunting Hour that for some reason, I really, really loved that. Like I saw that movie multiple times with Emily Osment in it from Hannah Montana. So she was in that movie. I remember really loving that movie. And then there was some other movies called, I think, Mostly Ghostly or something. I swear to God, they must have been on Disney Channel because I remember them. I remember watching them. Tell me if you remember what I'm talking about. And then I think the biggest one recently has been the adaptation of Fear Street, which is on Netflix. That became a series. I think it's about 2, 3, 4 parts. I don't know. It's multiple parts. I've never seen it, although I guess you would think that I would have, that would be up my alley. I haven't seen it. I don't know why I never watched it, but I know some people from Stranger Things are in that series as well. And I heard it's pretty scary, pretty chilly. So it might be a cool thing to watch for October if you're looking for something kind of, freaky to watch for the month of spooky season. And then, yeah, he probably has some other things in the works too that we don't even know about. But he has a ton of adaptations. He has a ton of books. I'm sure he's written things outside of Goosebumps series, but the main thing I know him from is Goosebumps. And I think You say the name R.L. Stein, people go, oh, Goosebumps. Like, everybody knows Goosebumps. Everybody knows the dun 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 dun, like the theme song and everything. Like, it's made such an impact, I think, for so many kids and preteens and teens. And something I read when I was younger. It might have been even something that my sister had. I don't remember, but we always had a ton of books in the house. And um, I think one of the most notable characters from Goosebumps is the ventriloquist dummy. I think his name was Slappy. Creepy. That was like one of the most creepy characters, one of the most creepy stories he's ever written. I know that character is in the Goosebumps movie, I think, and then he was definitely in the series. So yeah, like talking about dolls being creepy, like that one was creepy. I don't remember the full story. I don't remember the entirety of what happens, but I know that this doll comes to life and he is like evil, kind of like Chucky vibes, but different, because it was still for kids, so it wasn't like super gory, but it's very like strange, and you're just like, okay, I don't think I want to be around dolls anymore. It's kind of like that. um but yeah, he had some really good stories, and I wrote some of them down. So one of the okay, so Night of the Living Dummy, that was the one about the ventriloquist. If you want to go back and look that up, there was a story called Welcome to Camp Nightmare. I think I remember reading that a little bit back then. Stay Out of the Basement, and then yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I can go on and on and on. You really could just go to Google and type in like R.L. Stein Goosebumps series, and there's like a ton of books, like a ton. He was just writing them back to back to back. Now, the books themselves, they aren't long at all. They're very short compared to, like a lot of other books, a lot of other novels. So maybe that's why he was able to get them out so quickly. But yeah, it's like Goosebumps is just iconic. Like, I don't know what to tell you. It's made such an impact. I think in the 90s and even now, I think that's still something that um, kids will read or kids kind of know about. Like I said, because of the movies, because of the other adaptations that have come out, and I'm sure they'll continue to do other stories of his. Or if he continues to write more books, I'm not sure if he still does that or not. He might have moved away from that. I'm not too sure, but anyway, super iconic. Love Goosebumps. Um, Definitely, again, big part of like when you think about childhood books that you read, that was one that I would say stuck with me for sure. Now, before we move over to any other books or authors, I did want to remind you guys that my podcast is sponsored by Streann Media, and that the way I'm able to go live through you guys, um, and to do this podcast on Facebook and everything is through the Streann Studio software. So they have their own Streann Studio online that anybody can use. It is free, it's easily accessible. All you need to do is put in your email, and then you get a login code and you're in, and you're able to pretty much do exactly what I'm doing if you wanted to. And then, of course, if you didn't want to do a podcast, you're like, I don't want to do a podcast, I think I want to do gaming, you could do that. If you wanted to talk about other topics but just still be able to go live, you could do that. Their podcast, I'm sorry, not podcast, but their studio software is really set up for you to live stream. That's what their big specialty is. So if you have any ideas, or if you're a content creator and you're kind of looking for a platform to go do live streaming, and you kind of want to make it easier for yourself, I definitely recommend checking out Streann Media, and specifically the Streann Studio software. So you just go to studio.streann.com. And like I said, put in your email, you get a login code, and you're in. So it's really easy. Check it out. And of course, if you use their products, you could tag them on Instagram, Facebook, any other social media page. And then you could let me know too if you use it. That way I know that, what I'm saying is getting out to you guys. But anyway, and then some of the other books that I wanted to mention are a little bit more, I guess, newer, I guess you could say. So my most current read right now is called The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This book. I went to the bookstore sometime over the summer and I got a few books, and this was one of them. And actually, this book was recommended to me by one of the employees. So she saw me like looking at books. So I went to get one book called Love Radio, which is like a Black love story. It's like a teen love story. It's really cute. And so I found that one. And then I was like, well, let me just see like what else they have, because I really haven't been able to buy books lately. And so I ended up in the horror section. Again, I haven't read horror books like that in a really long time, but I ended up over there, and then I was just looking, and then so she had stopped me and was like, have you heard of this book? Like he's a really popular author right now, which I did not know that apparently. So he has some other books out too that I have not read. Maybe I'll get into them. I've barely gotten into this one, to be honest. I started it and then I stopped. I'm only about 30 pages in, so super early on in the story, still in the very beginning. It says that it was copyrighted in 2021, I think. Let me check to make sure. So this is a pretty like new book, and I think he has 2021. So this is a new book. And like I said, he has some other ones. And then on the back of it, it kind of says that, he has like a tribute to some of his stories are tributes to like a lot of the big popular like horror classic stories that we know, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, things like that. So I guess he takes a lot of inspiration from like 80s and 90s horror films and stuff. So in this book, like I said, I haven't read much of it, so I can't really tell you like what happens and everything. All I know is that it's pretty much surrounding a character named Lynette, and she's in this group where she goes and pretty much it's kind of like it's a support group, basically like what the title says. It's a support group because she was a part of a massacre back in the 80s and she survived. And so the other women in this support group are a part of, I'm not sure if they were in the same massacre as her, if they just have like their own trauma around being, like being targeted or something like that. And so she goes to this support group every year for like years and years and years. And I think at one point, one of her friends ends up missing, and then they find out that she got killed. And so now they know that like somebody knows about the group, and somebody's like coming after each one of them. And it's probably going to be one of those things where like one person is picked off, each chapter, and then you're trying to figure out like who is this, who's doing this. So I haven't like gotten to the meat of the story. I'm still in the beginning of it, but it seems pretty creepy. It's definitely playing off of like 80s horror because I think the massacre happened when she was a teenager. And so now it goes back and forth between the past and the present, basically. So if you want to check out, I guess, Grady Hendrix, here's one of his books. And then, like I said, he has some other ones that I think play on like 80s, 90s horror, that kind of thing. And then the other one, I have not read this at all. It's called We Are All the Same in the Dark. Have not read this. Again, let me know if you guys like if any of these novels are familiar to you guys, or if you know the story. Don't spoil it for me, but just tell me if it's good or not, or if you think I should look more into the author, and I will do that. I think this is a thriller by Julia. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but there you go. Can you see it? Yeah, you can see it. And then, if you guys want this information, I'll definitely put it in the comments if you guys want to look up these books. But I think, let's see, I think it goes back into like, somebody disappearing and then they're trying to find out like who did it type of thing. So yeah, it's definitely like more of a thriller, more of a mystery. So I feel like this will be good too. And it's not a long book. It's only, let's see, it's only about 300 pages. I know some people are like, oh, that's a lot, but to me, that's not really that much. 330 something pages, something like that. And honestly, I don't know if these books have sequels because I feel like that always happens to me. Like you find a book and you're like, this is really good, and then it ends, and then you like look it up, and then it's like part 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and I'm like, really? Now I'm gonna have to get like 5 other books to find out what happens to the protagonist and everything. So I like when books continue and everything, but sometimes it's like you're just like, oh god, that's gonna be more money to spend because I need to see like what's gonna happen in these other books. But so yeah, I don't even know if these books are sequels or not, or if it's just a one-off. But I'm interested in reading that one too. But I want to get through the final support group first, and then go into We Are All the Same in the Dark. And I think I just picked that out because I liked the cover and I kind of liked the name. I thought that was interesting, kind of stood out to me. And then, of course, I have Stephen King's big old It book here still with me. And I mentioned this last week, but I started reading the book like over a year ago, maybe even longer. And I was reading it on my Nook. So I was reading it like digitally. And then I had to kind of like take a break from it because I was like, this is a lot. Like, this is worse than watching the movie, to be honest. Um, and then when I was at the not when I was at the bookstore, but I actually ordered this because they didn't have it in the bookstore is what it was. So I ordered this and it's over 1,000 pages. So who knows like when I'll be able to get through this whole book. And I feel like I might need to like low key start over. And I don't want to do that because it's like I have to read about Georgie's death again and then Stanley's death. And it's like traumatizing low key to reread that stuff because it was like so sad, especially Stanley's death. Gosh, if you know, you know. Um, but yeah, so that's gonna be on like my TBR list to be read. And then please, you guys, leave me recommendations in the comments of any horror, thriller, mystery novels that you like. It doesn't have to be something new. It could be something old from back in the day or anything like that, or any other authors that you know that write good stories like that. Um, and then even if you know of any like internet stories, because there's a lot of people that write stuff online and they'll post it. Sometimes they'll post it anonymously or they'll have some type of like username to keep their identity a secret, and they'll post like scary stories, and it's like really good stuff where I'm like, this should be published. Like this is good. So if you know of anything like that as well, send it to me, or post a link to it in the comments so other people can see it. But um, I'm always looking to read other stories, read other books, even though it's dumb to do that because it's like, why are you going to start a book and then stop and then start reading something else? But I do that. I'm annoying like that. Um, oh yeah, and then I wrote down another book. This was a book that I read back in 2018, I think. It's called The Perfect Girl, and it was published in 2016, so fairly new book. And that was again kind of like a murder mystery type thing. So if you're into that, you could look it up. I would definitely look it up on Goodreads, and then you can kind of see like what people are saying about it. I would say that was a decent read. It wasn't like mind blowing or anything. It's kind of just one of those books where you kind of get through it and you're like, oh, that was a cool little read, but it's not something you sit and dwell and you're like, oh my God, that was so crazy. Or I need to go back and reread it like 2 or 3 times. At least it wasn't like that for me. I don't know. Check it out for yourself and you'll see. But again, let me know any other recommendations that you guys have because I really love to read. And I don't mind reading, thriller or horror even outside of October. I just felt like it kind of fit with, the theme of like all of my podcast episodes and everything to talk about scary stories and horror novels and thrillers and mysteries and all that kind of stuff. But I'm looking through the page of Stephen King's book to see if there's another, I don't know about chapter, but if there's another part that maybe I could read to you guys, because it seemed like a few people liked me doing that last week. Maybe I can incorporate that into my podcast. We'll have like reading time and I'll just like read to you guys. What's funny is when I think back on it, I was definitely that girl. I was that person in school that liked to be, I wouldn't say I like to always read out loud. Like I know there's some people that really hated that and were really fearful of that. And I'm not making fun of people like that because it was kind of nerve wracking sometimes. But I think a lot of times people that were like that was because they didn't read really well. So when they would read out loud in front of like the class and stuff, it was like they didn't know words and they were tripping over everything and stumbling. And, you could just tell that they weren't like well read or anything. But for me, like that wasn't really the problem. It was just like sometimes it was just like having the spotlight on you that made you a little nervous. But what's funny too is I remember being in like English class and I always remember wanting to be the narrator whenever we would read like plays and stuff. I'm like, I don't know why, but I guess it's because I like to read. I like to read. Um, I kind of like to be the one to tell like what was going on in between the scenes or what was going on with the character. So I would like raise my hand if they were like looking to fill characters and stuff and like, who do you want to be? And I was like, can I be the narrator? And they're like, yeah, go and write your name up on the board. I don't know why, but I was that person that wanted to be the narrator when we would do plays and stuff. So, um, anyway, let's see. I don't know if there's honestly, like if you could comment, if you're watching this live, comment right now if you want me to read a part of it again, or if you're like, no, it's too disturbing. I don't want to hear that. Because it is disturbing. Like I'm telling you, I know I said it's become my favorite horror movie, but the story itself is actually really like tragic. I mean, I love the friendship at the core of it and the message of like standing standing up to bullies or going against your fears or conquering, that kind of thing. But it is brutal. I'm not even gonna lie. Like the book itself is just horrible. Like horrible in the sense of how detailed it is, and just like the deaths are just so like sad. See, I came across chapter 3, which is called Six Phone Calls, and it says 1985 because the book. I don't know if you guys can see that. The book goes back and forth between when they're kids, when the losers are kids, and when they're adults and stuff. So that can be a little confusing too. And remember, I said last week that the book is in a different timeline than the movies and the miniseries. So the book, they're kids in the 50s. And I think I don't remember if I mentioned either that they changed their ages too. So in the book, they're only like 11 going through all this stuff. In the film, they're like 13, which is still young, but I mean, like 11, being 11 and going through all this stuff. Oh my God. So they're like in the 50s and when they're 11, and then when they're adults, um, it's in the mid 80s. So different timeline, very different time. And a lot of I think you could tell by a lot of like some of the terminology that's used are things that we wouldn't say, now, or things that would be considered offensive. And he was kind of like putting that in the book. And I'm like, um, sir, what were you doing? And like I mentioned before, like he was on drugs writing the story. So sure, that plays into it as well. Um, and there's also, I don't know if I should mention this on the podcast. I feel like this might be a little too adult to say that. I don't know how I could censor it, but there is, from what I've heard, I've never read it myself because I have not fully read through the book. There is a very controversial, very like adult, I'll say it like that, adult scene in here involving the kids. The word starts with the O, ends with the Y, I think. If you know, you know. So I've always been kind of like hesitant about reading that part because I know it's gonna be super cringy and uncomfortable. But I don't even know at what part that is in the book. It's probably like way further down the line. But um, okay, see, like I'm just flipping through the pages and some of these words, I'm like, what is going on here? Like what is this? Why would you write this, Stephen King? If you're listening to this, why would you write this? That's what I want to know. But yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna read it just because like I don't even know like what part I would want to read. I read Georgie's death because that's pretty much the very beginning of the story, and that kind of starts everything with what happens with the rest of the losers and everything. That's kind of like the big. Um, it's just significant to the story and to Bill's story for sure because that's his brother. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll save that for like next week or something. I don't know if I want to read it because I really don't know. Like, what part should I read? I wish somebody would tell me like what part to read. You guys, comment and tell me what part to read, or otherwise I'm going to end the podcast because I don't know. And I don't want to spoil it for myself either because there's actually a lot of this I have not read. And I'm flipping through, even though like I know obviously like what happens. There's still a lot of details that I'm like I don't know because they change stuff in the miniseries and then in the film as well. So. Um, I'm trying to see if there's like a funny part in here that I could read, maybe that wouldn't be so like depressing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to keep you guys waiting. So, what I'll do is if you guys want me to, just leave it in the comments and I'll probably like mark a passage of maybe like what I want to read for next week. Um, or you can let me know if there's a part in the book that you want me to read, as long as it's not like too crazy, then I'll read it. And yeah, I think I'm gonna kind of wrap up today's topic today. You can let me know if you enjoyed it. If you want to still talk about books, like we could definitely do a little bit more of that next week. Although October is kind of coming to an end, which I'm sad about because this has been really fun to talk about, like, horror topics. And it's been fun coming up with ideas that I wanted to discuss. And I feel like it gave me a little bit more like room to be creative and stuff. I do already have something planned for next week though. So if you want me to do like something else, then please let me know beforehand so I can kind of include it. Should I tell you what we're going to be talking about next week? I guess I can. So you'll know to tune in. Um, so next week we're going to be talking about pretty much just like horror news, if you want to call it that. So like scary movie news, like what's going on in the world of scary movies and everything. And I found out a couple of things doing research. And so I was like, okay, definitely got to talk about this on the podcast. I won't mention what it is yet. You'll find out next week. And so, yeah, I'll be doing that. So maybe I can squeeze in a little bit more book reading, or if there's some other books that I discover, or somebody lets me know about a really good book, then I'll definitely put that in there. But other than that, I think I'm going to be wrapping up things pretty soon. Um, and again, just a reminder that my podcast is sponsored by Streann Media. So thank you to Streann Media for sponsoring my podcast and for allowing me to go live every week on Facebook at 1 p.m. And like I said, that date might change, so be on the lookout for that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I could keep continuing talking about Lois Duncan or some of the other books, but I'm sure you don't want to hear that because it's really just me fangirling, because it really reminds me of like my childhood. And I look back and I'm like, God, I really love those books. I don't know why I didn't like take the time to just like purchase them when I got a little bit older, but now I'm going to be on the hunt for them. So if you see them somewhere, let me know. Like any of the books. It doesn't have to be the ones I mentioned. Just if you see some books published by her, hit me up. Let me know because I'm going to buy some. Okay, so I'm going to go and I'll see you guys next week. We're going to continue talking about horror things next week. I think next week actually might be the last Tuesday in October. So maybe it might be the last one. I don't even know for sure. But if there's still some things that I didn't quite touch on, it can kind of go over into November. It's not really a big deal. And then maybe we'll transition into more like, I guess, like Christmas stuff if you guys want me to. Um, but yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to stop talking and I will see you guys next week. Bye bye.